We're going to tag team the slides. We have about 25 minutes. Our intent is to get through it in about 15 to 20 minutes to open up more time for questions. So if you could hold your questions to the end, that'd be great. And we hope you enjoy our talk.
All right, so the goal of this session today is to walk you through some of the problems that we see in the cyberspace. So we'll set that stage up front, take you through kind of how AI can be applied to the cybersecurity approach, and then some of the lessons learned that we've observed over the last year and a half of creating some ontologies. Next slide, please. So a couple concepts to consider. Actions in cyberspace are near instantaneous without regard to geography. So the attacker has the advantage in cybersecurity. They don't have rules. They can pivot from country to country, while the defenders have their hands tied because they do have limitations as to what they can defend, and they can only defend their own perimeter. So when you take a look, that makes it challenging for the defense to ever achieve any true form of security. If you take a look through history, we've seen analogs similar to this in the past, where you had airplanes or air power in the military, as well as submarines and ships. In order for them to be attacked, you had to attack them where they were, right? So as we continue to evolve, technology solutions such as radar and sonar have come online. What we propose essentially, and what we're going to talk about, is we're looking to use artificial intelligence in cyber to help push the game in the same way that sonar and radar did. Next slide, please. A couple things to consider for cyber. One, there are a plethora of cybersecurity tools already out there in the space. There's no shortage of data. The problem with cyber is getting through the data. It's a very manual process in most cases today. And many of the operators or analysts that are sitting in defense end up having alert fatigue. They can't keep up with the amount of alerts that are being generated off of the products that are there. There's increasing threat complexity. So attackers are getting smarter, and they have all the same tools that the defenders do. So they get to test and figure out ways around those different security products. So you can't just rely on essentially security products coming up with the stop. I've already talked about alert fatigue. The time to detect and respond becomes a challenge. In many cases, for service providers like Deloitte, our service level agreements will say that if we end up seeing an attacker or a critical event come off one of those products, that we have 30 minutes for a human to go through and do an initial triage or identify whether or not it's malicious or it's an anomaly. In that case, the attacker has the advantage. They've got 30 minutes to maneuver, and they can maneuver pretty quickly. And so by the time you get through a full triage, it becomes very manual. There's a lack of visibility in cyber. So CISOs and defense teams don't fully understand their entire threat landscape. They also don't understand, in many cases, the threats or the actors that would be coming after them based off of their motive. I'll hit on a few others here. Talent is scarce. If you guys look, if you're in the cyberspace, you'll know that I think like there's a 2 million personnel shortage. The number changes every day, gains a couple 100,000. Detections of attacks after the fact, so it's very reactive in nature. And then there are high false positive rates. So when we take a look at the trends in cybersecurity, over the past several years, we keep seeing the attackers increase their knowledge. If you take a look at 2020, 60% of attacks were using malware or malware-identified signatures. If you move that up in 2021, it reduced down to 49%. And then as you get up even higher, it's at about 32%. Attackers are manipulating operating systems better than they were able to before, and they're hiding in plain sight. In many cases, they're using the security products themselves to allow for them to maneuver inside of the environment. Do you want to hit on AI here?
I was just going to add to what Mike said, that there are opportunities to leverage AI to do a lot of things, to include reduction of this false positive rate that you see that addresses really event fatigue. essentially there's more data and more events occurring than there are people to process them. So operating at machine speed to keep up with the adversary requires quite a bit more. The final point there is things that are known are typically codified within rules. To detect things that are new, or what we'll call 0 days, requires behavior-based techniques. And we'll talk about that shortly.
Yep. All right, so I'll just hit this slide quickly. Meanwhile, we talked about how the adversary has the advantage over the defender today, based off of the manual requirements for security. However, clients are looking for outcomes. They're looking for defense teams, service providers in Deloitte's case, or in the case of the organization, they may have their own security team. They're looking for the defenders to reduce the mean time to prevent, the mean time to detect, and the mean time to respond. So as we went through this journey over the last 18 months or so, what we've taken a look at is how can we take care of some of those manual processes? How can we identify lateral movement quicker? How can we focus around unknown identification and hook that up with things like orchestration or automation to now pivot to the endpoint or pivot to the network resource to get collection that normally would take 30 minutes for a human to do, to drive that down into minutes, maybe 3, maybe 5, whatever the right answer is. And so that essentially was the premise that we set out to go and achieve. Next slide, please. In order to do that, though, we needed to get the data into one spot. So it's great to have 15 different products that do different things and all supplement each other. But the reality is those products, in many cases, store their data in a separate database that the operators and analysts can't get to. So what we did is we created our own data lake, essentially for storage capacity. So on the AWS and GCP, we store clients' data in individual S3 buckets, and then we run analytics over top of each of those so that we can get to trend analysis. So think of verticals. If I have 12 retail clients, I should be able to take a look over the course of 3, 5 years, however much data I have, and start to identify what trends am I seeing in specific verticals. In order to do that, though, storage is one component. We needed to go through and be able to process and read the different databases in order to get to analytics. Abdul, I'll hand it to you.
So as Mike was mentioning, there's a ton of data. And one of the key things we want to do over this data, which would be really nice, is to be able to predict when an attack would occur. And not in every case, you're going to be able to do this. So for adversaries that come into your network that are utilizing a certain tactic or technique or procedure or TTP, they may exploit a certain protocol, they may exploit a certain application, they may go after a specific application that operates at a certain time of day. When they do that, it leaves like what we call a signature. And those types of signatures are what are called indicators of compromise, or IOCs. And so what we want to do is collect data, and we want to construct or codify a capability that will train over that data and then be able to identify with a high accuracy and high precision the type of behavior there. So this is basically setting the stage for something like machine learning or artificial intelligence, which will come in, be able to read through all of the data, apply the model, and then being able to say, yes, yeah, in fact, we have seen this behavior. Now, moving into step 4, for people that work, for Mike's team to make use of this, people that are data scientists and AI subject matter experts or mathematicians, they want to build models and then be able to pass off alerts so that analysts can actually use them. So once they receive the alerts, the key is, what are we going to do with this information? So if the alert says, we saw a type of behavior that we've never seen before where someone looks like they're going to compromise this part of the network, analysts, go do something about it. And that workflow is really how the AI ML experts interact with the cybersecurity experts. So let's dig a little bit deeper in terms of volumes of data and magnitude. In a lot of cases, what we'll call cyber is a place where you have a large volume, high velocity of data with very, very specific variety. And I'm characterizing a data space where data is usually highly structured to semi-structured. And what does this really mean? This means in a lot of ways that you know what the labels are. So for those, I know this is an AI summit, but I'll just sort of simplify it. When you have data in Excel, the column header names are really the labels. When you ingest data from a bunch of different sources, you have to achieve sort of, I guess, an alignment for all of the labels of the data in order to be able to build a model. That we're trying to look for phenomena. And in AI, phenomena is really called a feature. So what we're trying to do is take the labels of data that we have and be able to build a model that will predict a kind of phenomena, or basically build a kind of feature. So we engineer these features based on the data that we collect. Now, because the volume is here, we have certain things that we want to achieve. We want to achieve a low false positive rate. We want very, very fast detection times. So it's no good if at 9 a.m. we see an alert and we only process it at 3 p.m. and then hand it over to Mike at 4 p.m. We want to be able to see the alert and within minutes be able to hand that off to say, yay, verily, something bad is happening on the network. So the idea here is that if you get 10 terabytes of logs every single day, and you can reduce the volume of that, something like take a logarithm or be able to point an analyst in an appropriate direction, you've essentially done a kind of reduction. I don't want to say a dimensional reduction, but really an order of magnitude or two on the types of events that are critical for analysts to see. And this helps with workflow. So like I said earlier, it's difficult because there's more events than there are analysts. So helping them in any way, shape, or form, pointing them to the type of behavior or the time of day or the type of event is really critical. The other thing that I did want to add just briefly, there's this notion of dwell time. Dwell time in a network is the time from when a threat is deployed to the time that it's detected. And in 2022, the average dwell time for a threat to go undetected on a network at a minimum was 24 to 30 days. And in some cases where there are many attacks on different government installations or commercial spaces, this goes into the months, 6 months, or even possibly a year. So being able to deploy AI to detect some of these indicators of compromise from behavioral-based sources and being able to bring the data together offers a lot of value in addition to rules-based techniques for different tools. Anything to add on this one?
No, I think the only thing I would add is for where we're trying to go and where cyber needs to move as a whole is exactly what Abdul was just saying, is drive to response activities, because the adversary right now maneuvers with freedom inside of the environments that they're exploiting. So the real focus in order to change the game of cyber, specifically with AI, is to reduce the time for collection so that a human operator can get into an active engagement or a cyber knife fight. That's really the way that the industry needs to move.
So if you can ingest the data fast and then score a model over it and provide a prediction that gives an alert, that's really the kind of workflow that will cut down and save human calories. So if you can really take those human calories and apply it toward something that's been reduced or provided a direction through this AI, then that would be a lot more efficient than combing through a lot more data. This slide really is, from a bottom-up perspective, way that we can kind of sandwich and build up capabilities to support what we'll call a multi-tier AI usage for cyber. So again, as Mike alluded to, the goal is really on outcomes. Many individuals have heard of what we'll call affectionately the cyber kill chain. And this has been, I would say, implemented in a couple different ways, but one way that's the industry has really adopted is the MITRE ATT&CK framework. And it really supplies the notion of thinking from the left, from when an attack starts, how it propagates, and then finally to the completion of it. And what I'd like to also kind of add as a footnote is that on the bookends of the MITRE ATT&CK framework, there's a lot of behavior that occurs on the network. Within the MITRE ATT&CK framework, inside of that, there's a lot of activity that occurs on the endpoint. And this should really direct the types of characteristic data that's needed in order to do holistic detection. You do need network-based detection for things like initial foothold or exfiltration or command and control, but a lot of activity that's occurring within the actual endpoint itself has to be done with something like an EDR. As you collect this data and you build up this profile, there's different members of, say, Mike's team, for example, that will want to look for certain characteristics that are seen in threat intelligence. So what does this mean? That means we saw a variant of Petya, we saw a variant of WannaCry, we saw some other variant that's out there, that there's no rule that exists. So just some introductory material as another footnote. Whenever there's a rule, that's a known threat that come from threat intelligence. We process threat intelligence, we understand what the port and protocol is, we write a rule, we deploy it within the firewall or IDS, and that's essentially a countermeasure. So threat intelligence that exists today corresponds to known threats that's deployed as a countermeasure. You need those to be able to stop things that you know. But the moment that that rule is slightly perturbed or varies based upon a new variant, that rule will no longer be applicable in supplying the kind of protection you need. So this behavior-based capability coupled with hunting describes the kinds of ways that AI can kind of, if you will, be utilized for hunting teams. Good. I'll pass to you.
Yeah, I've actually got nothing. Perfect.
Oh, okay. And couple more slides here. This is sort of a general, aggregation of a lot of different things for opportunities to use AI around logs and events to support the security analyst teams. Some of the things that we're going to need to take into account is knowing what is a threat versus not a threat. And that is essentially what in AI it's called building a classifier. So we use different techniques to build different kinds of classifiers. In some cases, is it a threat or not? It might be a binary classifier, but there may be other considerations. In addition, we want to be able to work with folks from Mike's team to be able to improve the quality of our models. So models are typically measured on different kinds of metrics. These can be accuracy, precision, F1, recall, et cetera. And as they're deployed, Mike and his team will say, we missed one, we missed two, or there's a false positive rate. And what that becomes is the opportunity for us to acquire more data and retrain the model and then redeploy it. That interval of retraining, retesting, revalidating varies per network. There is no one tried and true rule. But what I will say is that there is too long of a time where the model's predictive power becomes stale. Adversaries adapt. So it's necessary to, retest, retrain AI, and this is part of the life cycle. Are there ways to do this automatically? Yes, and I think that part of also cuts down on some of the, calories that are burned. Anything else on this one? So I want to talk a little bit about an example, unknown unknowns. Maybe about 11 or 12 years ago, there was a lot of ideas about detecting unknown threats. And these are the equivalent of what are called 0 days. So remember what I said is that if you have threat intelligence and you come up with a rule and you have a countermeasure, that's for a known threat. So the idea here is how do you build an AI that will predict or look at something in general or pick up something or pick up a kind of behavior about something that's not been seen but still looks suspicious. So we've built a model and we've deployed it into a couple different customers that Mike's team are working through. And we've done this through building out anomaly detectors through different kinds of flows. We have deployed and built this through some auto-encoding technology. And at the end of the slide, we'll provide some references on some of the capabilities that we have. Happy to talk more, but I think we've come to the end. And this slide kind of shows some of the work that's actually been published in either the archive or in different IEEE venues. Any questions? And please utilize the mics so that we can get it on for the recording.
Is it on? Can you hear me?
Yes.
We got you.
Yeah, thanks for the presentation. I just wanted to ask you, you mentioned about all the variance and the fluidity in this environment, things that are happening all the time. I'm sure Deloitte's built an expertise around this, but is there a larger body or form that shares information about all the cyber threats that you guys can tap into, kind of like takes a village to attack this, as opposed to doing this, company by company sector by sector?
So they have what they call ISACs. So like financial sector has an ISAC where all the finance will come together. They'll share information of what they're seeing. They'll do the same thing in retail. So what you have is you have very industry specific, but there's really no governance. Data will go back to DHS. People can subscribe to DHS to receive some data feeds, but it's not really tied in the way that it should be. That's a maturation of the environment. Everyone sees that as a hurdle and it is starting to work through. But yeah, they do have individual ISACs. There is. It's the healthcare ISAC. It's the H ISAC. Yep.
This is great. I think my question is mostly around the interfacing of the business teams and the ML teams. I think we have a very similar approach at Bank of New York as well, where we are trying to do operational trade anomaly situations. But I think the one challenge I really want to hear more is about how do you create a pipeline of feedback that feeds into the model, because the languages or the toolkits used by operational teams or the business teams tend to be very disparate from the toolkits or the pre-processing required by the ML models. So we've been typically taking a batch approach, but if you have any ideas on how to make it more continuous and free-flowing, would love to hear that.
I love the question, but I feel like it's meaning of life that I have to answer like in 2 minutes. So we'll take a stab, we'll do a peanut butter spread, and then we can discuss, philosophy a little bit more. So you're asking a really great question. I'm gonna take a stab and then pass the mic. Batch-based feeds for data, if we sort of break up the problem in terms of data management, data engineering, application of business rules, and then really scoring of models and sort of the alerting side. The whole data engineering, data management side in terms of the life cycle of AI and ML represents about 70 to 80% of a lot of the major muscle movements for data scientists today, especially in cyber. However, there's only a finite number of feeds, approximately 30 data types that are relevant to cyber. So knowing that and understanding what those labels are on the data, you can actually build models appropriately and then be able to utilize certain tools to be able to feed that data in. The question becomes, what's an acceptable timing delay and timing advance on data that's ingested to support your capability? And I think that comes on a customer by customer basis. So if they have a temporal requirement to respond within 4 hours, but data is only refreshed every day, there's obviously going to be, if my math's correct, a mismatch there on the order of about 6, right? So the question is getting those timelines to match.
Yeah, I'm good. We can take it off.
We can talk
more
outside.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you all.